Hey everybody, welcome to our complete case interview webinar. We're going to be laying out the basic fundamentals of everything you need to know to pass your upcoming consulting case interviews. We're going to cover every component of the case interview, step by step, so you're going to have to give us time. Give us 80 minutes, this is going to be an in-depth presentation. You can either spend the 80 minutes now, or spend hundreds of hours searching and reading information about case interview prep, and still be making mistakes that are going to prevent you from passing your interviews and receiving consulting job offers. This webinar is a lot of years in the making. Over the past years, we have helped thousands of candidates prepare for case interviews through our case interview books and online course. Many of these candidates have landed offers at top-tier firms such as McKinsey, BCG, and Bain. The case interview strategies and techniques that we're teaching are working, and that's what we want to share. We're going to be talking about what is a case interview, what to do in the 8 different parts of a case interview, how to solve the 6 common types of cases, different formats of case interviews, these are the written case interview and group case interview, and our 25 best case interview tips. I'm super excited to get started, so please take 1 second right now to give this video a like, and we'll get started. Starting with our first topic, what is a case interview? A case interview, also known as a case study interview or CASE for short, is a 30 to 45 minute exercise in which you and the interviewer work together to develop a recommendation or answer to a business problem. These business problems can be anything that real companies face. How can Amazon increase its profitability? What can Apple do to increase customer retention? How should Tesla price its new electric vehicle? Where should Disney open another theme park? Case interviews simulate what the consulting job will be like by placing you in a hypothetical business situation. Cases simulate real business problems that consulting firms solve for their clients. Many case interviews are based on actual projects that interviewers have worked on. While consulting projects typically last between 3 to 9 months, case interviews condense solving the business problem into just 30 to 45 minutes. So which firms give case interviews? Every single consulting firm uses case interviews to assess candidates. McKinsey, BCG, Bain, Deloitte, Accenture, Oliver Wyman, PwC, EY, and any other consulting firm you can think of uses case interviews. You will not be able to land a consulting job offer without passing your case interviews, and there is no way around this. So why are case interviews used? Case interviews are the best way for consulting firms to predict which candidates will make the best consultants. Case interviews do not predict this perfectly, but they come quite close. Since case interviews simulate the consulting job by placing you in a hypothetical business situation, interviewers use case interviews to see how you would perform as a hypothetical consultant. Many of the skills and qualities needed to successfully complete a case interview are the same skills and qualities needed to successfully finish a consulting case project. Case interviews also give you a sense of whether you would like the consulting job. If you find case interviews interesting and exciting, you'll likely enjoy consulting. If you find case interviews dull and boring, consulting may not be the best profession for you. So, what exactly are the qualities that case interviews assess? Case interviews assess 5 different things. The first is logical structured thinking. Consultants need to be organized and methodical in order to work efficiently. Can you structure complex problems in a clear, simple way? Can you take tremendous amounts of information and data and identify the most important points? Can you use logic and reason to make appropriate conclusions? The second is analytical problem solving. Consultants work with a tremendous amount of data and information in order to develop recommendations to complex problems. Can you read and interpret data well? Can you perform math computations smoothly and accurately? Can you conduct the right analyses to draw the right conclusions? The third is business acumen. A strong business instinct helps consultants make the right decisions and develop the right recommendations. Do you have a basic understanding of fundamental business concepts? Do your conclusions and recommendations make sense from a business perspective? The fourth is communication skills. Consultants need strong communication skills to collaborate with teammates and clients effectively. Can you communicate in a clear, concise way? Are you articulate in what you are saying? The fifth and final quality is personality and cultural fit. Consultants spend a lot of time working closely in small teams. Having a personality and attitude that fits with the team makes the whole team work better together. So, Are you coachable and easy to work with? Are you pleasant to be around? All of these qualities can be assessed in just a 30 to 45-minute case interview. This is what makes case interviews so effective in assessing consulting candidates. Moving on, what exactly do case interviews cover? Case interviews can cover any industry, including retail, consumer packaged goods, financial services, energy, education, healthcare, and technology. They can also cover a wide range of business situations, including entering a new market, launching a new product, acquiring a company, improving profitability, and growing revenues. Although case interviews cover a wide range of industries and business situations, the good news is that there is no technical or specialized knowledge needed. Unless you are interviewing for a consulting firm that specializes in a particular industry or function, cases are designed to be solved by someone that has general business knowledge. With enough practice and repetition, anyone can master case interviews. Let's cover some of the differences between case interviews and typical job interviews. There are 5 key differences you should be aware of between case interviews and typical job interviews. Case interviews focus on one big question. In most job interviews, you may answer 6 to 8 different questions in a single interview, spending a few minutes on each. For case interviews, you'll spend 30 to 45 minutes solving one case and answering one big question. Case interviews may be broken down into several smaller questions that you'll need to answer, but the overall focus is to answer one overall question. Case interviews are a collaborative conversation. In a typical job interview, the interviewer will ask you a question, you'll answer it, and this sequence will repeat. Case interviews feel much less like an interview and much more like a collaborative working session. For a case interview, rather than just answering the interviewer's questions, you'll be working closely with the interviewer. You'll ask them questions to collect information, walk them through what you're thinking, and get feedback from them on your approach. You will not be able to pass the case interview without the interviewer's help and feedback. There is no one correct answer. At the end of a case interview, you'll deliver a recommendation to solve or answer the business problem that you were given. Some recommendations may be better than others, but there is no one single correct answer. Case interviews can be solved in a variety of different ways. Data and information can also be interpreted in many different ways. People's opinions on business issues will also be different. Due to all of these differences, there is a wide range of potential recommendations and answers. As long as these answers are supported with data and evidence, they can be acceptable answers. Fourth, the process matters more than the answer. In the typical job interview, interviewers assess you primarily on your answers. However, because case interviews do not have one correct answer, interviewers focus more on assessing you on the process. How did you go about solving the case interview? Did you use a logical, structured framework to break the overall problem down into smaller, more manageable components? Did you generate meaningful insights from solving quantitative problems? Did you draw appropriate conclusions from answering qualitative questions? The overall process of solving the case interview is much more important than just the answer that you get at the end. Case interviews also require no specialized knowledge or experience. In most job interviews, you are applying to work in a specific industry or for a specific function. During the interview, interviewers want to see that you have this specific knowledge and experience. Consulting is completely different because most consulting roles are generalist roles in which you do not specialize in an industry or function. Specialization in consulting occurs as you become more senior. In case interviews, you will not be expected to have specialized knowledge. Instead, only basic business knowledge is needed of fundamental concepts such as profit, market share, and competitive advantage. Now that you understand what a case interview is, we'll dive deeper into the 8 different parts of a case interview. We'll cover what to expect and what you should do in each step of the way. If you're enjoying the webinar so far, please help support this channel by giving this video a like. It only takes 1 second of your time and helps me be able to make more high-quality case interview videos. Also, please consider subscribing to get the latest and greatest videos. Although there is a wide range of different cases you could be asked to solve, all case interviews follow the same progression. The interviewer will provide you with the case background information. You'll synthesize the information and summarize it back to the interviewer and verify the objective of the case. You'll then have the opportunity to ask clarifying questions. Next, you'll create a framework to solve the case. Afterwards, either you or the interviewer will kick off the case, depending on whether the case is a candidate-led case or an interviewer-led case. We'll cover the differences between these two later. Once the case has been kicked off, you'll start exploring different areas of your framework to develop support for a recommendation. Along the way, you'll solve quantitative problems and answer qualitative questions. Quantitative problems may include estimating the size of a particular market, calculating expected profitability, or interpreting data in various charts, graphs, and tables. Qualitative questions may include brainstorming ideas or giving your opinions on an open-ended business question based on your business acumen. Finally, once you have gone through the major areas of the case, you'll deliver a recommendation at the end of the case interview. Let's go through each of the 8 steps to show you what you should expect and what you should do in each step. We'll illustrate each step with a case example. The first part of a case interview is understanding the case background and information. The case interview will begin with the interviewer giving you the case background. Let's say that the interviewer reads you the following. Our client is a large manufacturer and retailer of non-alcoholic beverages such as sodas, juices, sports drinks, and teas. They have annual revenues of roughly $30 billion and an operating margin of roughly 30%. Our client is looking to grow and is considering entering the beer market in the United States. Should they enter? As the interviewer reads this, take notes. It is important to understand what the objective of the case is and keep track of important information. One strategy for taking notes effectively is to turn your paper landscape and draw a vertical line to divide your paper into 2 sections. The first section should be roughly 2/3 of the page, while the second section will be 1/3 of the page. Take notes in the second section of your page. The second part of a case interview is synthesizing the information. After the interviewer finishes giving the case background information, confirm that you understand the situation and objective. Provide a concise synthesis like the following. To make sure I understand correctly, our client is a large manufacturer and retailer of non-alcoholic beverages. They are looking to grow, and our objective is to determine whether or not they should enter the US beer market. Make sure your synthesis is concise. You do not want to regurgitate verbatim everything that the interviewer has said. Only mention the most important pieces of information. You should also make sure that you verify the objective of the case. Answering or solving the wrong case objective is the quickest way to fail a case interview. The third part of a case interview is asking clarifying questions. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions before beginning thinking about how to solve the case. At this point, only ask questions that are critical for you to fully understand the case background and objective. You'll be able to ask more questions later. There are 4 types of questions you could ask. Asking for a definition of a term you're unfamiliar with, asking for information that strengthens your understanding of the company or situation, asking questions that clarify the objective of the case, and asking to repeat information you may have missed. So for this case, you might ask the following questions. Is our client looking to specifically grow revenues or profits? Answer. Our client wants to grow profits. Is there a particular financial metric or goal our client is trying to reach within a certain time frame? Answer. They are looking to grow annual profits by $2 billion within 5 years. The fourth part of the case interview is structuring a framework. After you understand the case background and objective, lay out a framework of what areas you want to look into in order to answer or solve the case. A framework is simply a tool that helps you structure and break down complex problems into simpler, smaller components. Think of a framework as brainstorming different ideas and organizing them into different categories. When creating a framework, it is completely acceptable to ask the interviewer for a few minutes of silence to write out a framework. You might say something like, "Would you mind if I take a few moments to structure my thoughts and develop a framework to tackle the case?" To solve this case, you might brainstorm the following questions. Does our client know how to produce beer? Would people buy beer made by our client? Where would our client sell its beer? How much would it cost to enter the beer market? Will our client be profitable from doing this? How can our client outcompete competitors? What is the size of the beer market? So this is not a very structured way of tackling the case. So you need to organize these ideas into a framework that has 3 to 4 broad areas, also called buckets. An easy way to develop these buckets is to ask yourself what 3 to 4 things must be true for you to be 100% confident in recommending that your client should enter the beer market. So, in an ideal world, these 4 things would need to be true. The beer market would need to be an attractive market with high profit margins. Competitors would need to be weak, and our client would need to be able to capture significant market share. Our client would need to have the capabilities to produce an outstanding beer product, and our client would need to be extremely profitable. You can rephrase these points to be the broad areas in your framework. You can write your framework in the first section of your paper. The 4 buckets in the framework correspond to the 4 things that we believe need to be true to be confident in recommending that our client should enter the beer market. Next, let's add a few bullets under each category to give more detail on exactly what information we need to know to decide whether our client should enter or not. Notice that each bullet in a bucket is a question that helps the overall question of that bucket. For example, in the first bucket, knowing the market size, the market growth rate, and average profit margins helps us determine whether the beer market is an attractive market. This entire process of brainstorming ideas and developing a structured framework should only take a few minutes. So, how do you come up with a framework so quickly? Most candidates make the mistake of either using a single memorized framework for every case, or memorizing a different framework for every type of case. The issue with memorized frameworks is that they aren't tailored to the specific case that you're solving for. When given an atypical business problem, your framework elements will not be entirely relevant. Interviewers can easily tell that you are regurgitating memorized information and are not thinking critically for yourself. Instead of memorizing frameworks, I recommend memorizing a list of 8 to 10 broad business elements, such as the following: market attractiveness, competitive landscape, company capabilities or attractiveness, customer segments or needs, profitability or financials, strategic alternatives, risks and mitigations, and creating your own. When given a case, mentally run through this list and pick the 3 to 4 elements that are most relevant to the case. This will be your framework. If the list does not give you enough elements, brainstorm and add your own elements to your framework. This strategy guarantees that your framework elements are relevant to the case. It also demonstrates that you can create unique, tailored frameworks for every business problem. So, using this strategy, you would run through your list of memorized business elements and select the following: market attractiveness, competitive landscape, company capabilities or attractiveness, and profitability or financials. This strategy is a shortcut for creating unique, tailored frameworks for every business problem. You do not need to develop a framework entirely from scratch each time. Now that you have your framework, turn your paper to face the interviewer and walk them through it. It may sound something like this. To decide whether our client should enter the market, I want to look into 4 main areas. 1, I want to look into the beer market attractiveness. Is this an attractive market to enter? I'd like to look into areas such as the market size, growth rate, and profit margins. 2, I want to look into the beer competitive landscape. Is this market competitive, and will our client be able to capture meaningful market share? I want to look into questions such as the number of competitors, how much market share each competitor has, and whether competitors have any competitive advantages. 3, I want to look into our client's capabilities. Do they have the capabilities to succeed in the beer market? I want to look into things such as whether they have the expertise to produce beer, whether they have the distribution channels to sell beer, and whether there are any existing synergies that they can leverage. 4, I want to look into expected profitability. Will our client be profitable from entering the beer market? I want to look into areas such as expected revenues, expected costs, and how long it would take to break even. After presenting your framework, the interviewer may ask you a few questions about your framework, but will otherwise indicate whether they agree or disagree with your approach. The fifth part of a case interview is kicking off the case. There are two styles of case interviews: interviewer-led cases and candidate-led cases. If this is an interviewer-led case, the interviewer will propose which area of your framework they would like to dive deeper into. They might say something like the following: "Your framework makes sense to me. Why don't we start by estimating the size of the US beer market?" If this is a candidate-led case, you will be expected to propose an area to look into. There is no right or wrong area to start first. Propose any area of your framework as long as you have a reason behind it. You could say something like, "To start, I'd like to look into the beer market attractiveness. I'd like to first understand the market size to determine if the beer market is an attractive market." If you end up picking an area that the interviewer does not want you to explore, they will redirect you to an area that they do want you to explore. So in this sense, the two styles of case interviews are quite similar to one another. The only difference is whether or not you have to proactively propose what area to explore first and what area you want to explore next. Once the case has been kicked off by either you or the interviewer, you will have to solve quantitative problems and answer qualitative questions. We'll focus on solving quantitative problems first. There are three different types of quantitative problems you may be asked to solve: market sizing or estimation questions, profit or profitability questions, and charts and graphs questions. Let's start with the first type, market sizing or estimation questions. These types of questions ask you to estimate the size of a particular market or calculate a particular figure. Let's say that the interviewer asks you, "What is the size of the beer market in the US?" Most candidates jump right into the math, stating the US population and then performing various calculations. Doing math without laying out a structure often leads to making unnecessary calculations or reaching a dead end. Laying out an upfront structure helps avoid these mistakes and demonstrates to the interviewer that you are a logical, structured thinker. For this market sizing problem, you could structure your approach in the following way. Start with the US population, estimate the percentage that are legally allowed to drink alcohol, estimate the percentage that drink beer, estimate the frequency in which people drink beer, estimate the average price per can or bottle of beer. Multiplying all of these steps together will give you your answer. By laying out an approach upfront, the interviewer can easily understand how you are thinking about the problem. With the right structure, the rest of the problem is simple arithmetic. Sometimes the interviewer will give you numbers to use for these calculations. Other times, you'll be expected to make assumptions or estimates. When performing your calculations, make sure to do them on a separate sheet of paper. Calculations often get messy, and you want to keep your original paper clean and organized. A sample answer to this question could look like: following my approach, I'll assume the US population is 320 million people. Assuming the average life expectancy is 80 years and an even distribution of ages, roughly 75% of the population can legally drink alcohol. This gives us 240 million people. Of these, let's assume 75% of people drink beer. That gives us 180 million beer drinkers. Let's say on average, a person drinks 5 beers a week, or roughly 250 beers per year, assuming roughly 50 weeks per year. This gives us 180 million times 250 beers, or 45 billion cans or bottles of beer. Assuming the average can or bottle of beer costs $2, this gives a market size of $90 billion. Once you have your answer, you should tie your answer to the case objective. In other words, how does knowing the US market size of beer help you decide whether or not our client should enter the beer market? You could say something like the following: given that our client has annual revenues of $30 billion, a $90 billion beer market represents a massive opportunity. The market size makes the beer market look attractive, but I'd like to understand if beer profit margins are typically high and determine how much market share our client could realistically capture. A second type of quantitative question you could be asked is to calculate profit or profitability. To answer profit or profitability questions, you only really need to know the basic formulas for profit. Profit equals revenue minus costs, revenue equals quantity times price, costs equal total variable costs plus total fixed costs, with total variable costs being equal to quantity times variable costs. Putting all of these equations together, we can rewrite them in the following simplified way. Profit is equal to the difference of price and variable costs times quantity minus total fixed costs. Also, you should know that profit margin equals revenue minus costs, all divided by revenue. Finally, you should know what a break-even point is. A break-even point occurs when a company sells enough product such that it has exactly recouped all costs. In other words, break-even occurs when profit is 0. To solve for the break-even point, simply set profit equal to 0 and solve for the unknown variable in the equation. For an example of a profitability question, the interviewer may ask you, assume that a 12-ounce can of beer sells for $2 on average. To produce a keg of beer, it costs $100 for raw materials, $95 for labor, and $75 for storage. If a keg of beer holds 1,800 ounces of beer, what is the profit margin for beer? As with any other type of quantitative problem, make sure to structure your approach before you begin doing any calculations. A sample answer could look like the following. To calculate the profit margin for beer, I will first calculate the total costs to produce a keg of beer. Next, I'll divide the volume of a keg by the volume of a can to determine how many cans a keg of beer produces. Afterwards, I will divide the total cost of producing a keg of beer by the number of cans in a keg of beer to determine the cost per can. Finally, I can use the price and cost per can of beer to calculate the margin of beer. Following this approach, the total cost of a keg of beer is $100 plus $95 plus $75, or $270. The number of cans of beer in a keg is 1,800 ounces divided by 12 ounces, or 150 cans. Therefore, the cost per can of beer is $270 divided by 150 cans, or $1.80. Since the average price of beer is $2 per can, the profit is 20 cents per can. This makes the profit margin 20 cents divided by $2, or 10%. Remember, always tie your answer back to the overall case objective. You may say something like the following. Compared to our client's overall operating margin of 30%, the beer market profit margin of 10% is significantly lower. Although the market size for beer is large, the low margin makes the beer market less attractive. A third type of quantitative question you could get asked is interpreting charts and graphs questions. The types of charts and graphs you should be familiar with include bar charts, pie charts, line graphs, bubble charts, and waterfall charts. Returning to our case example, the interviewer may show you the following. A helpful strategy for interpreting charts and graphs is to start your analysis by explaining what the axes of the chart show. This will help you understand the chart better. Next, don't just read what numbers the chart shows, but interpret what those numbers mean for the case objective. A sample answer may sound something like the following. For this chart, we have market share on the y-axis and different categories of beer on the x-axis. For each category, we see that market share is concentrated among a few large players. This implies a highly competitive market with high barriers to entry. Because of this, the beer market does not look attractive because it is so competitive. Let's move on. In addition to asking quantitative questions, the interviewer will also ask qualitative questions. There are two types of qualitative questions: brainstorming questions and business opinion questions. Looking at brainstorming questions first, the interviewer might ask something like the following. What are the barriers to entry in the beer market? Most candidates answer by listing ideas that immediately come to mind: brewing equipment, beer production expertise, distribution channels, brand name. This is a highly unstructured way of answering the question. Make sure to use a simple structure to organize your thoughts. A simple structure, such as thinking about barriers to entry as either economic barriers or non-economic barriers, helps facilitate brainstorming and demonstrates logic and structure. With this structure, you might come up with the following answer. Barriers to entry can be categorized as either economic barriers or non-economic barriers. Economic barriers to entry include equipment, raw materials, and other capital. Non-economic barriers include beer brewing expertise, brand name, and distribution channels. Examples of other simple structures to use include the following: internal-external, short-term long-term, economic non-economic, quantitative qualitative, direct indirect, supply side demand side, upside downside, and benefits and costs. Additionally, take your answer and connect it to the case objective. In this example, are these barriers to entry high or low? Do you think our client can overcome these obstacles to enter the beer market? You might say something like the following: looking at these barriers, I think it will take our client a lot of work to overcome them. While our client does have a brand name and distribution channels, they lack beer brewing expertise and would have to buy a lot of expensive equipment and machinery. These barriers make entering the beer market tough. The second type of qualitative questions are business opinion questions. The interviewer may ask you something like the following: do you think there are significant production synergies in producing non-alcoholic beverages and producing beer? As always, structure your answer and connect your answer to the case objective. Here is a sample answer. Production involves equipment, raw materials, and labor. There is likely some overlap in equipment, such as using the same bottling machines, but our client will likely need new equipment for brewing beer. Raw materials, on the other hand, are completely different. Our client would need to source barley, hops, and yeast, which it currently does not use, in its existing beverages. Finally, the same labor can be used, but employees will need training since producing beer is fairly different from producing a non-alcoholic drink. Overall, I think there are only a few production synergies that our client can leverage, which makes entering the market a bit more difficult. Let's move on to the final part of a case interview. You've done a ton of work, and now it is time to put everything that you've done together into a recommendation. Throughout the case interview, you should have been making notes of key takeaways after each question that you've answered. Take a look at the key takeaways you've accumulated so far and decide what recommendation you want to propose. For this case, you may have identified the following key takeaways. The US beer market size is $90 billion compared to our client's annual revenue of $30 billion. The beer market profit margins are 10% compared to our client's average margin of 30%. The beer market is highly concentrated across all categories. Barriers to entry are moderate, and there are some synergies with existing production. Remember, there is no right or wrong recommendation as long as you support your recommendation with reasons and evidence. Secondly, regardless of what stance you take, make sure you have a firm recommendation. You do not want to be flimsy and switch back and forth between recommending entering the market and not entering the market. Third, make sure your recommendation is clear and concise. Finally, include next steps in your recommendation. You can use the following structure when delivering your recommendation. First, clearly state what your recommendation is. Follow that with 2 to 3 reasons that support your recommendation. Finally, state what potential next steps would be to further validate your recommendation. Next steps can include a number of different things. You could include buckets in your framework that you were not able to cover. You could also include open questions that you have still not answered regarding this case. Finally, you could name potential risks relating to your recommendation that you would like to explore. Typically, the interviewer will prompt you for a final recommendation. They might say something like, let's say that you bump into the CEO in the elevator. He asks you what your preliminary recommendation is. What would you say? The conclusion of this case might sound something like the following. I recommend that our client should not enter the US beer market for the following 3 reasons. 1. Although the market size is fairly large at $90 billion, the margins for beer are just 10%, significantly less than our client's overall operating margin of 30%. 2. The beer market is very competitive. In all beer segments, market share is concentrated among a few players, which implies high barriers to entry. Our client lacks beer brewing expertise to produce a great product to compete with incumbents. 3. There are not that many production synergies that our client can leverage with its existing products. Our client would need to buy new equipment, source new raw materials, and provide new training to employees, which would be time-consuming and costly. For next steps, I want to look into our client's annual expected profits if they were to enter the US beer market. I hypothesize that they will not be able to achieve an increase in annual profits of $2 billion within 5 years, but I'd like to confirm this through further analysis. This would conclude the case interview. If you're interested in learning more about exactly how to crush every step of the case interview, check out our comprehensive case interview course. There is a link in the description below. The course covers these 8 parts of the case interviews step by step in more detail with more examples and practice cases to help you land your dream consulting job. Let's move on for now. Now that you have seen what a case interview looks like, let's take a look at the 6 common case interview business situations that account for over 80% of all case interviews. There is a very high chance you'll see these types of case interviews in your first round and final round consulting interviews. If you haven't already, please give this video a like to help support the channel. These videos take a ton of time to make, and each like helps a ton with the YouTube algorithm. Also, please consider subscribing to get the latest and greatest videos. So the first type of case are profitability cases. These are the most common types of cases you're likely to see in consulting interviews. A profitability case might look like this. An electric car manufacturer has recently been experiencing a decline in profits. What should they do? To solve a profitability case, you may want to use a framework such as the following. First, you need to understand quantitatively what is the driver causing the decline in profits. Is the decline in profitability due to a decline in revenue, an increase in costs, or both? On the revenue side, what is causing the decline? Is there a decrease in quantity of units sold? If so, is this decrease concentrated in a particular product line, geography, or customer segment? Or is the decline due to a decrease in price? Are we selling products at a lower price? Is there a sales mix change? In other words, are we selling more low-priced products and fewer high-priced products? On the cost side, what is causing the increase in costs? Is it from an increase in variable costs? If so, which cost elements have gone up? Or is the increase in costs due to an increase in fixed costs? If this is the case, which fixed costs have gone up? Next, you need to understand qualitatively what factors are driving the decline in profitability that you identified in the previous step. Looking at customers, have customer needs or preferences changed? Have their purchasing habits or behaviors changed? Have their perceptions of the company changed? Looking at competitors, have new players entered the market? Have existing players made any recent strategic moves? Are competitors also experiencing a decline in profitability? Looking at the market, are there any market trends that we should be aware of? For example, are there new technologies or regulatory changes? How do these trends impact profitability? Once you understand all of these things, you can brainstorm and prioritize ideas to address the profitability issue. Market entry cases are the second most common type of cases you'll likely see in consulting interviews. A market entry case might look like this. Coca-Cola is considering entering the beer market in the United States. Should they enter? To solve a market entry case, you may want to use a framework such as the following. So ideally, there are 4 things that need to be true in order for you to strongly recommend entering a new market. The market needs to be attractive, competition needs to be weak, the company needs to have the capabilities to enter, and the company needs to be profitable from entering the market. These 4 things become the buckets in our framework. To assess market attractiveness, look into the market size, growth rate, and average profit margins. To assess competition, look into how many competitors there are, how much share each competitor has, and whether competitors have any competitive advantages. To assess the company's capabilities, look into whether there are synergies the company can leverage. Finally, to assess expected profitability, look into expected revenues, expected costs, and how long it would take to break even. Once you have assessed these 4 areas, you should have a good idea of whether or not it makes sense to enter the market. The third type of case are growth strategy cases. Growth cases ask you to determine how a company can best increase its revenues or profits. A growth strategy case might look like this. Facebook is looking to grow its revenues. What are the best ways to do this? To solve this case, you'll need to identify all of the major ways the company can grow. You can use this growth strategy framework to help you identify all of the opportunities for growth. A company can either grow organically or inorganically. Inorganic growth comes from making acquisitions, forming partnerships, or forming joint ventures. Organic growth comes from growth driven by a company's own efforts and resources. Organic growth can be broken down into growth from existing revenue sources and growth from new revenue sources. For existing revenue sources, the company can increase the volume of units sold. They may target new geographies or customer segments. Growth from existing revenue sources can also be driven by an increase in the average price per unit sold. This can come from a price increase or from a sales mix shift towards higher priced products. For new revenue sources, the company can launch new products or services. Once you have identified all of the major opportunities for growth, you can prioritize the opportunities that are the most impactful and feasible. The fourth type of case you are likely to see in your consulting interviews are pricing cases. Pricing cases ask you to determine the optimal price for a particular product or service. A pricing case might look like this. How much should Apple price its latest iPhone for? There are 3 different ways to price a product or service, so to solve pricing cases, you may want to use the following framework. The first way to price is to price based on costs. This is done by setting a price higher than the cost of producing the product. Usually, companies aim for a specific profit margin, so they can set a price to achieve this targeted profit margin. The second way to price is to price based on the value the product provides to customers. To do this, you need to identify all of the benefits the product provides. Then you'll need to quantify these benefits into a dollar figure. The third way to price is to price based on competition. Identify competitor products that are similar to your product or are substitutes for your product. Then, you can set a price based on what competitors are charging for their products. Your answer to pricing cases will likely be a mix of all 3 of these different pricing strategies. Pricing based on costs will determine the minimum price you can realistically set. Pricing based on value added will determine the maximum possible price. And pricing based on competition will determine which price in between these 2 price points you should set. In order to get customers to purchase your product, the difference between your price point and the customer's maximum willingness to pay must be greater than or equal to the difference between your competitor's price point and the customer's maximum willingness to pay for their product. The fifth type of case are merger and acquisition cases. These cases involve determining whether a company should merge or acquire another company. A merger and acquisition case may look something like the following. A large pharmaceutical company is looking to acquire a small startup that specializes in cardiovascular drug discovery. Should this acquisition be made? Typically, in merger and acquisition cases, the company is looking to acquire another company in order to access a new market, access new customers, or to grow its revenues and profits. Ideally, the company should make the acquisition if the market that the acquisition target is in is attractive, the acquisition target itself is attractive, the acquisition would generate synergies, and if the acquisition is at a great price and would generate high returns on investment. These areas become the basis of our merger and acquisition framework. To assess market attractiveness, look into market size, growth rate, and average profit margin. To assess company attractiveness, look into their market share, profitability, and competitive advantages. To assess synergies, look into potential revenue and cost synergies. Revenue synergies include having access to new customer segments, having access to new markets, and opportunities to cross-sell, upsell, or bundle. Cost synergies include eliminating cost redundancies, consolidating functions or groups, and having increased buyer power with suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, or retailers. Finally, to assess the financials of the acquisition, look into the acquisition price and the expected return on investment. The last type of case you are likely to see are new product cases. These cases will have you help a company decide whether or not to develop and launch a new product or service. A new product case might look like the following. Procter & Gamble is looking to develop a new revolutionary consumer product that makes it easier for users to remove stains from carpets. Should they develop and launch this product? Ideally, to recommend launching a new product, 4 things need to be true. The market needs to be attractive, the product needs to meet customer needs and beat out competitor products, the company needs to have the capabilities to successfully develop and launch the product, and launching the product needs to be profitable. These areas become the 4 major buckets in our framework. To assess the market attractiveness, look into market size, growth rate, and average profit margins. To assess the product, look into whether it meets customer needs and how it compares to competitor products. To assess the company's capabilities, look into whether the company has the design and production expertise and whether they have the right distribution channels to sell to customers. Finally, to assess the expected profitability, look into the expected revenue and expected costs. That concludes our coverage of the 6 most common types of case interviews. Again, if you're interested in learning more about exactly how to crush every possible type of case interview, check out our comprehensive case interview course. There's a link in the description below, and the course walks through 20 full-length practice cases covering almost every type of case interview you can expect to see in your upcoming interviews. Let's move on to the next section. Now that you understand what a case interview is, the 8 parts of a case interview, and the 6 common types of cases, we'll move on to the different formats of case interviews. Everything that we've talked about so far is for the traditional case interview format. It accounts for 80 to 90% of all case interviews. However, there are 2 special variations of the traditional case interview, the written case interview and the group case interview. We'll cover both of these variants in this part of the webinar. If you haven't already, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to help support the channel. Let's start with written case interviews. These are typically only used in consulting final round interviews. For written case interviews, you will be given a packet of information at the beginning of the interview. This packet usually has between 20 to 40 pages of graphs, charts, tables, and notes. You'll be given information on the case background and the objective of the case. In some written case interviews, you may be given a list of important questions to answer. In other case interviews, you'll only be given the primary business problem you're asked to solve. You'll then have between 1 to 2 hours to analyze the information in the packet and make 3 to 5 slides to present your analysis and recommendation. In some written case interviews, you'll have to create your slides entirely from scratch. In other written case interviews, you'll have pre-filled slide templates that you will need to fill out with your analysis and work. Afterwards, you'll present your slides to the interviewer and answer their follow-up questions. A big difference for written case interviews is that you'll be working by yourself. The interviewer will leave the room to let you work, and then will return at the end to hear your presentation. Written case interviews are used in addition to traditional case interviews because they test for different skills than traditional case interviews. There are 4 major qualities that consulting written case interviews assess. The first is logical, structured thinking. Consultants need to be organized and methodical to work efficiently. Can you structure complex problems in a clear, simple way? Can you use logic and reason to make appropriate conclusions? The second is data and information analysis. Can you take tremendous amounts of information and data and identify the most important points? Can you interpret charts, graphs, tables, and other information correctly? The third is slide making skills. Consultants need strong writing skills to make their work easy to understand and digest. So, can you create slides that are clear and easy to follow? Can you create slides that tell a compelling story? The fourth is presentation skills. Consultants need strong communication skills to present their work in a clear, concise, and persuasive way. So, can you communicate in a clear and concise way? And are you articulate and persuasive in what you are saying? There are 10 steps to solving written case interviews. Follow these steps to make the most of the limited time that you have to complete these written case interviews. The first step is to understand the objective. What is the primary business question you are trying to answer with the data and information provided? Answering or solving the wrong business problem is the quickest way to fail a written case interview. Therefore, the first thing you should do is to read the instructions and case background information so that you clearly understand the primary question you are trying to answer. Some written case interviews will provide you with a list of 3 to 4 key questions that you will be expected to address or answer. Once you understand the overall business problem and case objective, read through the list of key questions. This will tell you what the most important areas of the case are. These will be the questions you want to investigate and answer first. If the written case interview is more open-ended and does not provide you with a list of key questions, skip this step and move on to the next one. The next step is to flip through the information packet that is provided to see what information is available. Identify what data you have and what data you do not have. If the written case interview has provided you with pre-filled slide templates, make sure to flip through those as well. The goal in this step is not to read and analyze every slide. That would take too much time. Instead, you want to get a sense of what data and information is out there. This will help you decide and prioritize which slides are most important to read and analyze in more detail later. Written case interviews have strict time constraints, so you want to make the most of the limited time that you have. Moving on, before you begin reading and analyzing the information, you should create a basic framework to help guide your analysis. Select 3 to 4 broad areas that you think are the most important to analyze. In other words, what are the 3 to 4 things that you need to know to answer the primary question of the written case interview? If the written case interview has provided you with a list of 3 to 4 key questions, make sure to include these in your framework. If the written case interview has provided you with pre-filled slide templates, these slides often provide clues on what the most important areas are. If the written case interview does not provide you with a list of key questions or pre-filled slide templates, you'll likely need to create a framework from scratch. Use your knowledge of what information exists that you have gathered by flipping through the slides to help you determine what the main areas of your framework should be. Now that you have a solid framework to guide your analysis, the next step is to identify what information you can use to answer each area of your framework. Since you have already flipped through the material and cataloged what information exists, you simply need to match different pieces of information that exist to different areas of your framework. Now, all that is left to do is to read and analyze the information that is relevant to each area of your framework. As you answer the major questions in your framework, make sure to write a 1 or 2 sentence summary of the key takeaways or the answer. This will help you remember the work that you have done and make it easier for you to decide on a recommendation later. Once you have finished reading and analyzing all of the important and relevant material, you should have a list of key takeaways or answers to the major areas of your framework. In this step, you'll read through the key takeaways and decide on what recommendation they collectively support. You should not expect every key takeaway to support your recommendation. Often, you'll have key takeaways that support your recommendation, but others that go against your recommendation. If this is the case, you'll need to mediate conflicting insights and decide on which insights are the most important. Remember, there is typically no right or wrong answer. As long as your recommendation is supported by data and evidence, you will be in great shape. When you have decided on a recommendation and have the supporting data and evidence for it, you'll want to create a structure for your presentation slides. Here is a simple but effective structure you can use. For slide 1, present your recommendation and the 3 reasons that support it. For slide 2, present your first reason and the data that supports it. Slides 3 and 4 will cover your second and third reasons and the data that support them. For slide 5, summarize everything that you've covered so far. If the written case interview has already provided you with pre-filled slide templates, the structure of your presentation may already be decided for you. Moving on to the next step, now it is time to fill in your slides. When filling in your slides, make sure to use descriptive slide titles that clearly communicate the main message of each slide. Additionally, try to make your slides easy to digest. Each slide should have one key message. If you have any time remaining, review your slides one more time to check for any mistakes or errors. You can also spend some time cleaning up the slides to make them look neat and polished. Afterwards, you can brainstorm potential questions the interviewer may ask you during your presentation. They may want to know how you performed your analysis or reached your conclusions. They may also challenge your assumptions or interpretations of the data. Preparing for the potential questions that could be asked will help your presentation go much more smoothly, and you'll feel much more confident while presenting. This wraps up our coverage of written case interviews. Let's move on to covering group case interviews now. For group case interviews, you'll be put in a group of 3 to 6 people with other candidates that are also interviewing for the same consulting job that you are interviewing for. The group will be given materials which contain the case background, objective, and all of the information needed to solve the case. You'll then have 1 to 2 hours to work together as a group to create a slide presentation that summarizes your work and recommendation. During this time, the interviewer will be listening in on the discussions and conversations that the group will have, but they will not interfere or answer any questions. Once the time is up, your group will deliver your presentation to the interviewer, who may ask follow-up questions on the work and findings. For group case interviews, there's a heavy emphasis on assessing how well you work in a team. Consultants spend almost all of their time working closely in small teams, so teamwork and collaboration are essential. Group case interviews are used in addition to traditional case interviews because they assess a set of skills that traditional case interviews cannot assess. Group case interviews focus on teamwork and collaboration. By putting candidates together into groups, interviewers can assess how candidates work with other people and how open candidates are to other people's ideas. They can also see how effectively candidates communicate and persuade teammates, and how candidates can balance listening and speaking. Interviewers will assess you on criteria such as the following. Can you make meaningful contributions while working in a group? Are you easy to work with? Can you handle conflict and disagreement with teammates? Do you bring out the best ideas and qualities in other people? So, how can you excel in a group case interview? The key is to focus on adding as much value as you can to the group. There are 6 different ways you can add value to the group. The first way is to lead or facilitate the discussion. If the interviewer is not leading the discussion and just observing the group, one way to add value is to lead or facilitate the discussion. You can propose what topics to discuss, the order they should be discussed in, and how much time should be allocated to each topic. When the group gets off track or goes on a tangent, you can bring the group's focus back together. Leading or facilitating the discussion establishes you as a group leader, which will leave a positive impression on the interviewer. However, because this role has so much responsibility and visibility, many people will try to take on this role. Therefore, a group may have multiple leaders or facilitators. When trying to lead the group, make sure you remain respectful and do not interrupt other people when they are speaking. The second way is to expand upon other people's ideas. If a group member suggests a great idea or raises a good point, you can build upon it. Wait until the group member has finished speaking and then jump in and complement that person's idea. Add more details or give more examples to make the idea more concrete. The third way is to synthesize information. A synthesis is simply a reconciliation of different viewpoints and ideas together. This requires minimal effort but adds tremendous value to the group. What is the best way to synthesize information? First, concisely summarize the major ideas that the group members have made. Then, state what you like about each idea. Finally, propose an idea that consolidates the best points of each idea. Synthesizing information does not require much thinking because you are simply repurposing the ideas of other people. This makes it an easy way to contribute to the group. The fourth way to add value is to keep track of time. Time goes by very quickly in consulting group case interviews. Therefore, a simple way to add value is to be a timekeeper and make sure that the team is on track. In the beginning of the discussion, you can propose a schedule or plan to make the most of the limited time that the group has. You can then volunteer to keep track of the time so that the group can finish discussing and deciding on everything that it needs to. The fifth way to add value is to play devil's advocate. You can help the team develop strong points and ideas by testing the team's thinking and considering potential risks or downsides. When the team has decided on an idea, bring up potential risks or downsides that the team should consider. This helps the team develop a more fully thought out answer or recommendation. Be careful when playing devil's advocate. You do not want to be attacking ideas or bringing them down. Instead, you want to be offering constructive feedback to test the idea and make it stronger. The last way to add value is to take notes. By taking notes and keeping track of what other people are saying, you'll be able to recall what has been discussed if any group members have questions. This way of adding value to the group is not as recommended as the other strategies to add value. Taking notes deprives you of opportunities to speak. Therefore, it is better to focus on understanding what other people are saying to identify opportunities to speak up, rather than to focus on just taking notes. This concludes our section on the different formats of case interviews. By now, you should have a good idea of how to handle both written case interviews and group case interviews. We're moving on to the final section of our webinar. In this section, we've pulled together 25 of our very best case interview tips to help you improve your case interview performance and to avoid the common mistakes that most candidates make. If you haven't already, please give this video a like to help support the channel, and also consider subscribing so that you can get the newest videos. Tip number 1, make sure you understand the business problem and objective. The quickest way to fail a case interview is to answer or address the wrong business problem. Therefore, when the interviewer starts the case by reading the case background information, it is important that you identify what the business problem is and what the primary question is that you're trying to answer. You should always verify the objective of the case with the interviewer. Tip number 2, summarize the case background information and verify the objective articulately and confidently. Typically, after the interviewer reads the case background information, you'll be expected to summarize the case information and verify the objective of the case. This is the very first impression that you'll be making on the interviewer, so it is important that you can articulately and confidently summarize everything. This step of the case interview is not difficult, making it an easy opportunity to make a great first impression. Tip number 3, ask clarifying questions if needed. Don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions. You will not be penalized for this. If there is a term that you are unfamiliar with, ask for the definition. If you don't understand the objective of the case, ask questions to clarify this. All of these questions will help strengthen your understanding of the case situation and make it easier for you to solve the case. Tip number 4, ask for time to develop a framework. Don't be afraid to ask for a few minutes of silence so that you can organize your thoughts and ideas into a framework. No interviewer expects you to instantly have the perfect framework after they finish giving you the case background information. Developing a great framework takes time, and interviewers know this. Tip number 5, don't use memorized frameworks. The issue with memorized frameworks is that they aren't tailored to the specific case that you are solving for. Many times, some of the elements of your memorized framework will not be entirely relevant to the case. Additionally, interviewers can tell when you are regurgitating memorized information and are not thinking critically for yourself. Therefore, learn how to create unique and tailored frameworks for each case. Tip number 6, make your framework as MECE as possible. Your case framework should be as MECE as possible, which stands for mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Mutually exclusive means that none of the different parts of your framework overlap with one another. Collectively exhaustive means that all of the different parts of your framework account for everything that you would need to know to solve the case. Tip number 7, structure your approach before doing any math calculations. Before doing any math calculations, lay out an upfront approach or structure to walk the interviewer through what you are about to do. Developing a structure will help you avoid making unnecessary calculations or reaching a dead end. If the interviewer approves of your approach, then the rest of the math problem is just simple arithmetic. Tip number 8, choose easy numbers to work with. It can be very difficult to do case interview math quickly and accurately under high-pressure situations. Therefore, if you get the opportunity to make assumptions or estimates, choose round numbers that are easy to work with. Why make the calculations more difficult for yourself? Using precise numbers neither makes your assumptions better nor makes your final answer more accurate, so you should always try to use round numbers if possible. Tip number 9, round when appropriate. Look for opportunities where it may be appropriate for you to round numbers to make the calculation slightly easier for yourself. For example, if you're multiplying 19,999 by 201, ask the interviewer if you could round these numbers and multiply 20,000 by 200 instead. You do not want to round numbers in every step because that may indicate that you are uncomfortable with doing math. However, the occasional rounding may be acceptable. Tip number 10. Use abbreviations for large numbers. If you are working with large numbers in the thousands, millions, billions, or even trillions, use abbreviations rather than writing out all the zeros. For example, 10,000 can be expressed as 10K, 200 million can be expressed as 200M, and 300 billion can be expressed as 300B. This reduces the chances that you'll accidentally add or drop a zero in your numbers. Tip number 11. Talk through your calculations out loud. Talking through your calculations out loud provides two benefits. 1. It decreases the likelihood that you'll make a mistake. 2. It makes it easier for the interviewer to follow what you are doing. If you happen to get stuck or make a mistake, the interviewer can jump in to offer suggestions or guidance. The interviewer cannot do this if you are not communicating exactly what you are doing. Tip number 12. Keep track of your calculations. It is important to keep your calculations neat and organized to prevent making math mistakes and to prevent repeating calculations that you've already done. First, do your calculations on a separate sheet of paper to give yourself more space. Second, as you calculate different numbers, circle important numbers that you are likely to use over and over again, and draw a box around your final calculated answer to make it easier to find later. Tip number 13. Sense check your numbers. Accidentally missing zeros or adding extra zeros during your case interview calculations is the most common math mistake. To avoid this, you can do a quick sense check after each calculation to confirm that your answer is in the right order of magnitude. For example, if you were multiplying 115 million by 22, you should expect your answer to be in the billions because 100 million times 20 is 2 billion. Tip number 14. Talk through the axes of charts and graphs. When given charts or graphs to interpret, the very first thing you should do is look at the axes. This is the most effective way to understand what the chart or graph is trying to show. When you are given multiple charts or graphs to look at, this will also help you understand how each chart or graph relates to each other. Tip number 15. Structure your answers to qualitative questions. During a case interview, you may be asked to brainstorm ideas. Instead of listing the first few ideas that come to your mind, use a simple two-part framework to answer the question in a more organized way. This will help facilitate brainstorming and demonstrate that you are a logical, structured thinker. So, use a two-part framework such as internal-external, short-term, long-term, economic-non-economic, or quantitative and qualitative. Tip number 16. Answer so what after every question. When the interviewer asks you a quantitative or qualitative question during a case interview, don't just answer it and stop there. After answering the question, ask yourself, so what? How does your answer help you solve the overall business problem? What implications does your answer have for your potential recommendation? You should be tying each answer that you give back to the case objective. Tip number 17. Predict what the interviewer is going to ask you next. A great way to stand out in a case interview is to answer the interviewer's follow-up questions before they even get the chance to ask them. After each question that you answer, try to think of what follow-up questions may be asked. Answer or address these questions immediately after giving your answer. Your interviewer will be very impressed. Tip number 18. Ask for time to develop a recommendation. At the end of the case interview, the interviewer will ask you for a recommendation. Don't be afraid to ask for a minute to gather and collect your thoughts before delivering your recommendation. No interviewer expects you to instantly have the perfect recommendation when prompted for one. Developing a great recommendation takes time, and interviewers know this. Tip number 19. Have a firm recommendation. You do not want to have a flimsy recommendation in which you are switching back and forth between two different recommendations. Instead, Have a single recommendation that takes a firm stance. Remember, there is no right or wrong recommendation. As long as your recommendation is supported with data and evidence, your recommendation will be accepted. Tip number 20. Include next steps in your recommendation. Including next steps in your recommendation is an easy way to help you stand out from other candidates. By including next steps, you demonstrate initiative and ownership over the business problem that you were asked to solve. To identify potential next steps, ask yourself, what areas of your framework have you not explored yet? What other open questions do you have? And what else would you need to know to feel more confident in your recommendation? Tip number 21. Structure your recommendation. Your recommendation should be clear and easy to follow. Therefore, use the following structure. Clearly state what your recommendation is, provide 2 to 3 reasons that support your recommendation, and then propose potential next steps. Tip number 22. Use a hypothesis-driven approach. During the case interview, you should have a hypothesis of what the answer to the case is. A hypothesis is simply an educated guess based on the knowledge that you have. As you analyze data and gather more information, make sure that you are constantly changing and refining your hypothesis. There are 2 benefits to using a hypothesis to drive the direction of the case. 1, it ensures that you are focusing on relevant areas that will help you solve or answer the case. 2, by the time the interviewer asks you for a recommendation, you will already have a refined hypothesis on what the answer or solution to the case should be. Tip number 23. Be 80-20. You have limited time during a case interview to solve the case. Therefore, you won't be able to cover all of the different areas in your framework and get answers to every single question that you have. Therefore, focus on the most important issues and use the 80-20 principle. The 80-20 principle states that 80% of the outcome comes from 20% of your efforts. So, during a case interview, focus on the most important questions or areas that will have the biggest impact or effect on developing your answer or recommendation. Tip number 24. Be coachable and easy to work with. During a case interview, you not only need to demonstrate that you can solve the case, but you also need to demonstrate that you would be a great fit for the consulting firm. At the end of the interview, the interviewer will ask himself, would I want to work with this person? An easy way to pass this is to be coachable and easy to work with. When the interviewer provides suggestions or guidance, take them. When the interviewer challenges your answer, politely provide your rationale, but acknowledge that you understand the interviewer's points. Tip number 25. Be enthusiastic. During the interview, display enthusiasm. This not only makes the interview more fun and interesting for the interviewer, but it also demonstrates that you are passionate about consulting and working at the firm. Interviewers want to hire candidates that love their job and work hard. Displaying enthusiasm is an indicator for these characteristics. So that concludes our section on our 25 best case interview tips and also concludes our webinar. Congratulations on making it all the way through. If you're looking to learn case interviews quickly and in the right way, make sure to check out our comprehensive case interview course. We designed this course to be the only resource you need to use to pass your case interviews and land consulting job offers. We've covered a lot in this webinar, but there are so much more strategies, techniques, and content that I really want to share with you. We created this comprehensive case interview course to walk you through step by step exactly what you need to say and do in every step of the case interview. We'll teach you the most effective strategies to not only solve your case interviews, but to make you stand out from the crowd. We'll also work through 20 full-length practice cases together. So if you're interested, make sure to check out the course in the link below. We hope that you found the information in this webinar helpful, and we'll see you in the next video. So make sure to subscribe for more videos.